almost 2 years, this team was unbeatable. They won almost every big tournament and set a new standard in Valorant. Their players became household names, known for sharp plays and smart strategies. They had a mix of raw talent and teamwork that made them stand out. Fans looked up to them. Other teams tried to catch up, but few came close. At first, it all seemed perfect. Wins came easy. Everything worked together. But over time, small problems started to add up. Pressure built inside the team. Management decisions didn't always make sense. Players struggled to keep up with the demands both on and off the stage. What happened to them changed the game. This is the story of how 5 players created a dynasty, became global superstars, and then watched it all crumble. This is the story of Sentinels, the downfall of Valorant's greatest team ever. Before Sentinels became the team everyone feared, they were just another group trying to figure out Valorant. It was March 2020, and the game wasn't even released yet. Teams were rushing to form rosters, hoping to find the next big thing. Some thought Valorant might be the new Counter-Strike, others weren't so sure. Most organizations were signing well-known CS players, betting on their aim and experience. But Shazam saw things different. After being dropped from Cloud9's CS team, he wasn't looking back. Instead, he focused on 3 players most others thought were risky picks. Zombs, a controller player who barely had a name outside Overwatch. Sick, a rifler with great mechanics, but no big wins. And Dapper, a Sentinel player grinding ranked matches hard. On paper, this looked like a team made from leftovers. But in practice, something clicked. Their scrimmages caught attention. They weren't just winning, they were winning in ways that didn't add up. Their sight takes were sharp. Rotations felt like reading minds, and individual plays were jaw-dropping. Their chemistry formed quickly. Shazam's calls gave players freedom while keeping the bigger picture clear. Zombs made controller play look like an art. Sick's raw skill was proving experience wasn't everything. Dapper held sights like he knew what was coming. Still, they were missing one thing, a star player who could take over when the game was on the line. The player they wanted was locked in with another team. Tyson Tanzengo was stuck on Cloud9's roster, and it looked like Sentinels would have to make do. Then, out of nowhere, Tens was benched, and everything changed overnight. It was April 2021. Tens had been retired for months, streaming to thousands of fans, but not playing competitively. His buyout price was huge, and many thought he was done with pro play, just a content creator with some serious skills. Then came a big problem for Sentinels. Their starting player, Sinatra, couldn't play because of an ongoing investigation. The biggest tournament in Valorant history, Masters Reykjavik, was only weeks away. Most teams would have panicked and grabbed whoever they could find, but Sentinels did something no one expected. They worked out a deal to borrow Tens from Cloud9 just for the tournament. The announcement shook the scene. Tens, the player known for insane mechanical skill who had stepped away at his peak, was back, even if just for a short time. Their first match was against Fnatic, Europe's best team. Everyone expected Fnatic to win easily. Instead, Sentinels played 18 minutes of near-perfect Valorant. Tens wasn't just getting kills, he seemed to know exactly where enemies were. The whole team played around him, using their abilities and moves to give him space to shine. They weren't just 5 players anymore, they were a single, unstoppable unit. One simple clip went viral, a 3-kill play on Bind. It wasn't the flashiest moment, but Tens' smooth movement and confidence showed everyone he belonged at the top. Social media exploded. #Sen trended everywhere. Sentinels weren't just good anymore, they were a global sensation. Tens streams blew up and sponsors came calling. But winning Iceland wasn't going to be easy. The competition was tough. Europe was strong, Korea was hungry, and every team was studying Sentinels closely. What they did there would make them legends. In late May 2021, Valorant held its first major international LAN, Masters Reykjavik. It was the first time fans could see which region was really on top. 10 teams from around the world qualified, but the team everyone was talking about was Sentinels. They came in as North America's top speed, but for a team that had never played on LAN together, with a stand-in who was still officially on loan, the expectations were mixed. Some saw potential, others thought they'd fold under pressure. Instead, they made history. From their very first match, it was clear Sentinels weren't just prepared, they were on another level. While other teams were still adjusting to the LAN setup, Sentinels looked comfortable, sharp, and completely locked in. Their chemistry was untouched. Their strategy was tight. and their mechanics were ahead of everyone else. The tournament meta played into their hands. Jet was still at her strongest, but only a few players could push her limits like Tens. Zoms used Astra and Viper like chess pieces, controlling space in ways no one else did. Sick on Phoenix and Reyna gave the team explosive entries that opened rounds up early. Dapper was the safety net on defense, always in the right place, and Shazam kept the whole team steady with his calls, adapting in real time while still setting up his teammates to shine. Their series against Fnatic on Bind is still one of the most talked about matches in Valorant history. Tens dropped 36 kills, but it wasn't just the numbers, it was the confidence in every duel, the fluid movement, the way he created pressure just by existing. Sick's support play was flawless. Dapper's flanks came at perfect times. Zoms won fights with pure game sense. Everything clicked. It didn't look like 5 players trying to win. It looked like one unit, operating with total trust. Round after round, their dominance grew. They didn't just beat teams, they solved them. They were reading setups, baiting out utility, rotating ahead of schedule. The fundamentals were perfect, but so was the creativity. By the time they reached the finals, once again, against Fnatic, it felt inevitable. Sentinels swept the series 3-0. No overtimes, no map losses, no sign of weakness. Tens ended the tournament with the best stats in almost every category: ACS, first kills, clutch percentage. But it wasn't just about him. Each player had their moment. Each piece mattered. The win was more than just a title. It made them global stars. Their celebration went viral. Their social numbers exploded. Sponsors, streamers, and even non-gamers started talking about them. And most importantly, they'd proven that you could win at the highest level without giving up the content side. They were grinding, they were filming, they were streaming, and they were still the best team in the world. For 6 months after Reykjavik, nobody could touch them. They weren't just ahead of the meta, they were the meta. But in esports, momentum fades fast, and the higher you climb, the harder it is to stay there. By the time Sentinels walked into Berlin for the 3rd Masters tournament, they weren't just champions, they were the face of Valorant. 6 months had passed since Reykjavik, and during that time, every other team in the world had one goal: figure out how to beat them. The game had started to evolve. Chamber was now in the meta, and his playstyle demanded sharp, long-range control and defensive setups. It didn't mesh with the fast-paced, reactive style that had carried Sentinels to the top. But meta shifts were only part of the story. The real changes were happening off the server. They were still the same 5 names, but the team behind them wasn't the same anymore. What used to be a hungry, disciplined squad had slowly become a group of public figures. Tens' stream numbers were climbing faster than his scoreboard stats. Socials, brand deals, and content shoots were now part of their weekly routine. Matches weren't just games, they were performances. And losing meant more than just dropping a map. It meant risking the brand. Behind the scenes, the schedule was slipping. Scrims weren't as consistent. Strategy talks were shorter. There wasn't much of a coaching system to lean on, and most decisions still came down to the players. And when the pressure of staying at the top collided with the weight of building personal brands, that balance started to break. Meanwhile, other teams were catching up, and in some cases, passing them. Gambit came in with tight, layered setups that looked like they belonged in a playbook, not a ranked queue. Ascend had refined their gunplay into a system. Vision Strikers brought structure and teamwork that could only come from years of grinding together. Sentinels didn't look bad, they just didn't look ahead anymore. Their Berlin run ended with a loss to G2, and while the series wasn't a blowout, it wasn't competitive either. 10 still pulled off highlight plays, but they didn't swing the outcome. The magic from Reykjavik, the synergy, the trust, the control was gone. To fans, it felt sudden. But to anyone paying attention, the cracks had been forming for months. The team that once practiced like their careers depended on it was now balancing streams, brand obligations, and burnout. They still had the firepower. What they'd started to lose was the edge. And when the edge is gone, staying on top becomes the hardest job in esports. By October 2021, Sentinels were still on top in name, but behind the scenes, the team was caught between 2 visions of what success meant. On one side were the players, the ones who built their brands by being more than just pros. Streaming, content deals, sponsorships, that was where the real money came from. Winning tournaments was great, but it wasn't the main source of income anymore. On the other side was the old school belief: win first, everything else follows. Build a legacy through trophies, not Twitch clips. Nobody sat down and chose one path over the other. The shift didn't happen with one big decision. It happened in small ways. A stream running long that pushed back scrims, a content shoot booked during a VOD review, a tournament prep session shortened because someone had a sponsored segment to film. Zom said it out loud more than anyone. Why grind all day for a prize pool when you could stream for a few hours and make more money? Why stress about comps and strategies when your name alone brings in 6 figures a month? To him, it was just being smart with time. But inside a team trying to stay sharp, those words hit differently. The coaching structure didn't help. Sentinels brought in multiple coaches that year, but none of them had real authority. No system, no accountability, and when players make more than the staff trying to direct them, the power balance is already lost. Practice didn't evolve. Strats didn't change. They kept running the same setups they used back in Reykjavik because they hadn't built anything new. For a while, it still worked. Their raw skill was enough to beat most teams. But when the rest of the scene caught up mechanically, Sentinels had nothing fresh to fall back on. Other teams studied, adjusted, adapted. Sentinels stayed still. Then came the tense question. His loan from Cloud9 was still technically in place. Was he fully committed? Was he even going to stay long term? It was hard to plan around a player whose future wasn't clear, especially when that player was central to your entire system. The uncertainty only added more tension. Scrim disagreements turned into full-on debates about priorities. Those debates became bigger questions. Were they still a serious team, or just content creators in jerseys? By the end of the year, the roster looked the same, but the identity was gone. The Iceland squad that felt like a unit was now 5 individuals pulling in different directions. And for the fans who had watched them rise together, the fall was about to hit just as hard. December 2021, the end of the competitive season. The eyes of the Valorant world were on Champions, the biggest tournament the game had ever seen. It was the event that every pro dreamed of, the one that would decide who really stood at the top of the world. Sentinels weren't there. The same team that looked unbeatable just 18 months earlier didn't even qualify. Their last shot was the North American Last Chance Qualifier, a bracket full of teams that they used to dominate. It should have been a formality, but instead, it was a disaster. They didn't just lose, they got outclassed. Round after round, they looked one step behind. Teams they had beaten before were now running circles around them. Not through hero plays or lucky clutches, just better prep, better reads, better team play. It didn't look like Sentinels anymore. The sharp, confident executes were gone. The quick calls were messy. The aim that used to carry them wasn't enough. And then came the announcement. Zoms was stepping down. Nobody was shocked. The signs had been there for months, but it still hit hard. The guy who changed how controllers were played in Valorant was done. A core piece of what made Sentinels Sentinels had walked away. Fans turned on him, called him lazy, said he quit, but the truth wasn't that simple. He just happened to be the first one to say out loud what everyone was already feeling, that it was over. Konpeki was brought in next. A solid player, but not someone who fit right away. He'd never played with this group, and the meta was shifting fast. What they needed was time. Time to rebuild. Time to gel. Time to adjust. But they didn't have time. Then Sick took a break from competition. That's when it all became real. His health struggles, kept quiet for months, had finally boiled over. Pressure, the expectations, the non-stop spotlight. It had all built up behind the scenes. Now the roster was down to 3. The original 5 who won Iceland were breaking apart, and there was no clear fix. This wasn't a bad week. It wasn't a cold streak. It was the end of something. The end of a team that made everyone believe they could do the impossible. This was supposed to be the dynasty, the team that would dominate for years. Instead, they didn't even make it to the biggest tournament of the year. By early 2022, Sentinels were no longer part of the title conversation. Other teams were lifting trophies. Other players were in the spotlight, but somehow Sentinels still mattered because their fall had changed the scene. They were the first team to show what a modern esports brand could look like. Not just 5 pros with good aim, but 5 personalities, streamed to millions, edited into highlight reels, followed like celebrities. They built a following bigger than the game itself, and that's what made their collapse so hard to ignore. When they were winning, everything looked effortless, but behind it were cracks that never got fixed. No coaching structure, no long-term system, no plan for what came after going viral. Once other teams caught up mechanically, Sentinels had nothing left to fall back on. The fans noticed, so did their rivals, so did the orgs. Teams like Optic and 100 Thieves studied what went wrong and built around it. They kept the content but added discipline. They hired real coaching staffs. They structured scrims like a job, not a suggestion. They let players build brands, but made sure winning came first. The players from that original Sentinels lineup each took different paths. Tens became the face of the game, the entry point for new fans and casual viewers. His plays still filled up clip channels. His stream stayed one of the biggest in Valorant. Shazam became a leader off the server too, turning years of IGL experience into a long-term role in the scene. Zoms, Dapper, and Sick all moved in their own directions, some toward content, some toward recovery, some toward the next chapter in competitive play. But none of them forget what it felt like when everything worked. For a short time, they were the best in the world. They set the standard, and when it all fell apart, it left a lesson that's still shaping the game. This is the story of how 5 players created a dynasty, became global superstars, and then watched it all fall apart. Not from a single mistake, but from 100 small choices. Ones that didn't seem like a big deal in the moment, but added up until it was too late to fix. The names on the roster are different now. The meta has changed. The org has moved on. But people still talk about Sentinels, because the story that ends too soon is the one that sticks. But they weren't the only team to change Valorant forever. Want to see the best players from every year and how they made their mark? Click the video on screen before it's gone, and don't forget to subscribe for more.